The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword just released on the Nintendo Switch, but in HD. This time we get to revisit the world of Skyloft and everything that happened before time in Skyward Sword once again. And that means we get to play through all the bosses once again. And of course, since we weren't able to cover the original game, it's time to cover this one. We are today ranking all of the bosses within Skyward Sword. Mini bosses will be included, however, some of them have been left out if they were just basic enemy archetypes. For instance, the Stalfos in one dungeon were considered mini bosses, and we're not counting them because they can be found in the overworld. So we're doing bosses and mini bosses and ranking a total of 18 different bosses within Skyward Sword and seeing which one is the best. Of course, it'd probably take me another month to finish this game at the pace that I go through, but of course I played this game over 4 to 5 times before in the past, so today's gameplay will be brought to you by GameXplain and Goodgamez. Thank you guys so much for capturing this. If you guys want to check out their channels, there are the links down below, but their gameplay will be used throughout the video. Also, feel free to put your predictions down below of who do you think will come in first and who do you think the best boss in this game actually is. I'm very interested to see if your ideas combine with mine. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure you leave a like and subscribe to stay up to date on all things Zelda and Nintendo in general, and let's get into our list of the top 18 best bosses from Skyward Sword HD. Number 18, we have Stalfos. Stalfos is the first mini-boss that you'll encounter in this game, and it really combines a lot of strategy within this boss battle. You have to hit Stalfos in a certain way in order so that you don't clang against his swords, and that you hit his body instead. So you have to be smart with how you swing, which is a very good tutorial for how to use the sword in a proper way at the very beginning of the game. It's really just used as a tutorial fight and nothing much more. It's very basic and it's not hard at all. Moldorm is a weird, awkward game of Pac-Man, but with a giant link and a tunnel system. It doesn't move exactly the way that it should, and it's kind of clunky and it's weird, but your job is to get around this maze and hit the backside of Moldorm in order to kill him 3 times. And this can get very annoying as Link moves just so weird. You can only back up and hit sharp angles. You can't really turn around the way you could in, say, a Pac-Man game. But this isn't the worst boss for sure, and it is kind of unique based on the items in order to dig underground, but besides that, there's nothing much else going on here. Number 16, the first Imprisoned. Now, this fight is the first of 3, and it just increasingly gets better, even though it increasingly gets more annoying, if that makes sense. Well, the first fight, you're just cutting off this guy's toes in order to drop him down. You can use that tactic by cutting off his toes and eventually smacking the spike in his head, or you can use the high ground in order to jump off from high above and land on his head in order to drive the stake into him. You can really do any of these, and it's really not that hard of a boss fight, and it really just sets you up for a lot harder versions to come in the future. Number 15, we have Dreadfuse. I'm not too big of a fan of Dreadfuse because it's a kind of rinse and repeat of some other boss that we get to fight earlier on in the game. It really doesn't do anything different from that other boss, but it is cool for what it is. You're on this catwalk and you have to keep knocking him back in order to kill him for good, and you have to do this 3 times as he also brings your back closer to you, which means if you get too close to it, you'll run into the barbed wire and take damage. It's a very interesting boss fight, but once again, it doesn't really hit as good as it does that first time you fight him. Number 14, we have the first fight against Ghirahim. Ghirahim's first fight is very similar to Stalfos, where it kind of trains the player how to use the sword and how to move the sword in unique patterns in order to hit enemies. But it's a very good start for a very good boss battle. It teaches the player that you can't just slash anywhere you want, that you have to lead your attacks and kind of throw off your enemy. And it shows a really good AI that knows where you're going to swing, so you have to mix it up and change it up, or he'll grab your sword and potentially even take it and try to attack you with it. It's very, very interesting of how this works, and it's just a really good start to the game for a very first boss battle. Number 13, you have Magmanos. A cool fact about this is that's actually magma hands in Spanish. Just thought I'd let you guys know that. I took a little bit of Spanish, don't worry. But anyways, this boss battle is very interesting. You have 2 magma hands trying to grab Link. One way to attack them, and really the only way to attack them, is to stand on these rocks and have the lava hand pick Link up so he can reach the high ledge and he can grab these balls of water. It's these little plants that have water in them that he can actually throw at the hands in order to harden them up, which he can then crack with a couple of sword swings. I just love the physics of this, of Link swinging his sword and cracking this rocked hand very slowly and steadily. It's actually pretty cool. Number 12, we have the Imprisoned number 2. This time the Imprisoned grows arms and he has fingers and toes, and you have to chop both of these off, either chopping them off from the top or just chopping his toes, and it's the same process. This one's slightly better than the first one because now you have more appendages to attack, and he can do more things such as climb to higher ledges. It's a little cooler, but at the end of the day, it's the same boss fight. Oh yeah, and you also get to use the good buddy Groose in order to shoot bombs at him to prevent him from climbing to higher levels. Number 11, we have Moldarach. Moldarach is a giant ancient scorpion that you have to kill by using your sword swings very wisely and hitting the eyeballs on his claws when they open and turn in certain angles. Once you do this, the claws fall off, and now you can use the Gust Bellows in order to move the sand around the room to find him. It's really not that hard. He's a giant scorpion and you can definitely tell where he is, but it's cool to move the sand and see the physics of the sand moving and trying to find the boss, and then you pretty much just stab him in the eye multiple times. It's a pretty cool boss with some cool phases, but at the end of the day, it's extremely easy. Number 10, we have Scaldera, which is a giant boulder spider lava monster. This one is very unique because the battlefield actually takes place on a giant ramp, and you'll be running up and down the ramp multiple times in order to fight this thing. Sometimes it'll walk above you and roll down, and sometimes it'll just chase you from the bottom all the way to the top. And it's your job to knock him back down by either hitting him with bombs or letting him to get to the top and pretty much hit bombs on his own and roll all the way back down. When he inhales, you throw bombs into his mouth and hit his eye as it moves around throughout the rocks, and you have to use precise sword swings in order to hit his eye wherever it's located. This is actually pretty cool and a very clever and unique boss for sure. Number 9 is Ghirahim number 2. This boss fight makes you learn from the first one, where you're punished if you make mistakes. This time he won't just grab your sword. If you hit his red glowing spikes, you take damage, so every sword swing has to be extra precise when battling this guy. And then eventually he pulls out double swords, and you have to be even more precise as he tries to battle you with these swords, where you can parry with a shield, or you can just dodge and get out of the way as he falls from the ceiling. He has a lot of things going on, and even a really cool attack where he puts a whole bunch of spikes above you or around you, and you'll have to spin accordingly in order to shoot them back at him. It's actually a pretty cool boss fight and a really good sword versus sword battle that you don't really get too much in Zelda games. Number 8, we have Scervo. Scervo is very simple and a very easy mini boss, but the reason why he's so much higher than Dreadfuse is because he does it first, and just the atmosphere and everything about it is so cool. You're fighting a robot pirate that's good at swordplay on the edge of an ancient pirate ship where there's nothing but sand sea below. It is pretty cool. Literally walking the plank with a fight to the death with this guy. Whoever falls loses. It's your job to keep knocking him back once again as the barbed wire fence gets closer to you, and you can't fall back into it or you're gonna take damage, and you have to knock him eventually all the way off the pirate ship, and by the end it's really cool to see him fall. It's cool to also realize that he also tries to block as you're pushing him back on his last foot, so you have to also time your sword swings accordingly. Number 7, you have Stalmaster. Stalmaster is so much better than Stalfos because now he has multiple different arms, and he can hold a total of 3 different swords, and you're going to have to attack very precisely. This battle is not about just dodging and weaving, but more about learning how to use your sword in the most advanced ways possible. This is now your test of final fate. You've already practiced this multiple times, now it's time to actually execute it. And this could be very difficult the way that his swords are placed. Sometimes you have to stab, sometimes you have to be overhead, diagonal, it's just all over the place, and it's a really good training boss, but a boss that does test all of your skills up to now in the game. Number 6, we have the Imprisoned number 3. This is the last time, thank God, that you fight this guy, but this time he's cracked out and it is a serious battle. It's very easy to lose this one, not from losing hearts, but rather from just losing, because if the Imprisoned gets to the very top towards the temple, it's over, it's game over, it's bad, it's done. You lost. It doesn't matter how many hearts you have left. So you have to utilize Groose and Link in perfect sync in order to get this to happen. And at the very end, after you're already cutting toes and fingers off, he grows a halo in this 3rd phase and rises to the top. You have to rush and make your way to the top as fast as possible, and I mean literally booking it to the top. It's very easy to mess this up, but once at the top, you have to get into Groose's catapult and actually launch yourself on top of the Imprisoned's head, which can be very difficult if you're not knowing what you're doing, and then drive the stake down into his head. It's actually a crazy boss fight, very climactic, and it can get you sweating for sure. Number 5, we have Tentalus, and this boss is actually extremely weird looking. I know the memes, yes, of course, but it's actually a good boss battle. The first phase will have you using your Skyward Strike in order to shoot lasers at the tentacles and chop them all off, and then eventually shoot an arrow all the way up to the eye of Tentalus to knock him down. Anything with a bow and arrow just feels really cool, that you have to hit a super cool shot like that, and then you run up and slash his eyeball to enter phase 2. You get to the top of the pirate ship in order to enter that phase by getting attacked by tons of snake hair from Tentalus, and you have to keep chopping, and eventually, once again, repeating the steps of shooting the eyeball with the bow and slashing the eye. The whole scene and everything is really cool. All the sand sea turned into a vast ocean full of a raging storm and the sinking pirate ship. This all just adds to a very climactic feeling boss fight. Number 4, we have the final boss in the game, Demise. Demise is the ancient evil, the beginning of what Ganon eventually becomes, and it is a great story, and I love that timeline part. But the fact that the actual fight itself, with the very first fight against evil, it's not really that grand compared to past games. So with that said, this fight is still pretty good. It's a really good 1v1 sword battle that you'll have to swing your sword and use everything that you learned up till now in order to take down Demise. And it has lots of cool lightning strikes where you gather lightning with the Skyward's thrust into his chest, and you can do a cool little flip at the end and stab him in order to kill him. And I like how he jumps out of the way at the last second and you have to try to time it down, and it's really cool. It's a really good boss fight. It's really cinematic with the background and everything that's going on with the rain and the thunder and the lightning. But for a final boss, I wish it had multiple different phases and utilized some more items or something. I don't know. Number 3, we have Bilocyte and the Corrupted Levias. This fight is in 2 gigantic phases. The first one, you're actually using your loft wing to fly along the giant sky whale Levias in order to take out the parasite Bilocyte that's corrupted inside of him. You'll be flying around his body, taking out giant gooey eyeballs with limbs and different tentacles stretching out, and you'll have to do some good maneuvering in order to kill them. And eventually you'll land on top of Levias to fight Bilocyte itself, which is a tether back and forth very similar to the original Ocarina of Time Ganondorf battle, where you have to hit the balls back and forth in order to hit his different sides of his head, eventually hitting his eyeball. And your swings will have to be accordingly, swinging to the right or to the left to knock the ball to the right or to the left respectively. It's a really good boss fight with 2 really good phases, and I really enjoyed what this actually turned out to be. Number 2, we have Koloktos. This is a giant statue with 4 arms. Well, technically 6 arms, as the other 2 guards his heart. It's your job to dodge his giant attacks and rip off his arms until his heart is exposed, allowing you to chop it up. Well, halfway through, he'll actually cage it up and come out of the ground completely, revealing that he also has legs, where he'll spin around the room using giant swords, and this time, the Master Sword isn't the only thing that you'll use, or the Goddess Sword by this point in the game. You'll actually need to use his giant scythes in order to stab it in the chest and break through that giant fence that's guarding it. It's actually a really cool fight that utilizes different weapons, and it kind of even feels like Breath of the Wild battle if you think about it, picking up a giant weapon and just wailing on an enemy. This is a really cool boss battle with different attacks, throwing different knives around the room, and once again throwing those axes at you and chasing you on foot around the room. This can be one of the best Zelda boss fights I've fought, probably ever. It's really good, and the whip really makes a great debut here. And my number 1 boss in The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword HD is Ghirahim 3. This is the last boss before Demise and the last time you fight Ghirahim, and it is so good. It's a cultivation of everything he's done up till now, but his whole body is changed drastically in this new version. He's rock solid, and everything that you do to him does no damage. Your job, however, is to push him off these platforms and then come down on top of him, stabbing him in the chest, which is actually a really cool, satisfying move to do, and you do this until you knock him all the way to the bottom floor, which then initiates Phase 2. Phase 2 is a sword duel where you do things that he's done in the past, and you have to have very precise sword movements in order to attack him. And he moves into Phase 3, which he brings up a gigantic sword, and you'll have to break the sword by slashing it in the places that you've been ripping it this whole entire time. Ghirahim is so powerful now, and he can do flips and twirls and have all kinds of new abilities. This is an amazing boss fight, and probably one of the best in the entire series. But that is my list of the best Skyward Sword HD bosses. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below what your opinions were and how you felt about this list, and if you would have put anybody higher or lower. And please feel free to like the video and subscribe if you enjoyed everything that you've seen today. Also feel free to check out GameXplain and Goodgamez in order to see these gameplays all the way through if you haven't seen them yet and you're new to the game. But thank you guys so much for tuning in, and like always, I will see you all on the next one. See you guys.